hi, Ed.
Hey, Jack, good to see you tonight.
Yeah, good to see you. And as we just discussed a little bit before we started recording, you're celebrating your anniversary tonight or today, and you celebrated tonight. So happy anniversary.
Thank you.
And it seems like it's a big number, 59.
It is. It is a big number, but we're for it getting bigger yet. So,
Yes. Yeah, that's the truth. For Ginny and I, it's we celebrated our 52nd wedding anniversary. So we're still behind you, but we're looking for many more. Um, it's it's an amazing number. It's an amazing thing to even in this day and age to see marriages that last as long as yours or mine, have
right,
lasted. And of course, there's reasons behind it. It's not necessarily that you and I are such great catch that the women in our lives don't want to let us go, but there's been uh, we have formulated and found our relationship, upon principles that we find from our faith, our walk of faith. It really directs us. At least has directed myself. I don't know when you. I gotta just be personal with you for a little bit. When did you first meet Gail, and in meeting her, what brought about the understanding that you loved her and you wanted to spend your life with her?
whoa. Um, I met her 59, 60, 62 years ago. So, and began dating her on a regular basis 62 years ago. I see love as in that as being something you develop, you grow, you nurture a relationship that brings the two of you together with the idea that you become one. And that word one is echad, E-C-H-A-D in Hebrew, echad, which means a unity. One is a unity, in this case, a unity of two. Um, and I see that as fundamental, and because you don't really know each other that well, and you're not mature enough. They say of the woman that she matures much quicker than the man, and that is true because even physiologically, the male does not completely form mature ideas, reach that maturation point until around age 25, when it becomes more coherent and less emotion driven in making decisions. So I see love as more than an emotion. I see it as a convergence of of wisdom and knowledge and understanding, and converging with the emotion or feeling or the attraction, combining into a wholesome oneness, a unified one. And in our case, it took a bit of time uh, to move beyond the physical attractiveness into to fully developed spiritual wholeness, oneness. In which time that happened, and it happened well. We uh, were engaged and then became married. So I see it as how does love, how do you define love? It's very difficult, but I see love as the manifestation of God. And I did at that time. And my wife, Gail, did too, as a manifestation of God, um, spiritually, that he embeds into our minds, both emotionally and rationally, to make these life changing and lifetime decisions. So How did it come about? It came about through building the relationship in a whole wide range of experiences, maintaining moral integrity through it all, so that you don't cross boundaries that should not be crossed. Keep those boundaries clean, and yet marriage will take care of those boundaries. Marriage, you become one, and those boundaries cease to be the restraints that they once were in the relationship. So I would say that in the married years that follow it, it is a wonderful time of learning of each other more preciously as you go through the experiences that life brings. And then, of course, when children come, that sense of echad, of being one, is enlarged to one family, echad, a unit, a family unit. And then your energies and your thoughts and your goals and your vision begins to be manifest not only between the two of you, but through your entire, through your children. And then, of course, in time, your grandchildren. If you live long enough, your great-grandchildren. So there's that influence that that oneness has as it spreads over time. So I think that's part of what love is building a relationship for a lifetime in a meaningful, loving way. I don't know if I answered that well enough or not for you, but that's kind of where I come from on the subject. So tell me about you and Jeannie.
Look, well, Jenny and I met 54 years ago. She had just graduated high school, and living out here, she lived out of state, but she had an aunt and an uncle living here near us, attending our church. And there was some thought about trying to find for her a Christian young man, because there were few and far between where she lived and as she was growing up. And there's recognition. There was a couple of boys out in this area named Cairns, and they might be a possible match for you. And so she came out, and I met her at a vacation Bible school. It was early June, mid-June, something like that. And she came out, and I went to the vacation Bible school. My mom was running it, and they said, "There's someone here you need to meet." And I had met her cousin possibly a year before, and said, "Okay," but wasn't quite sure I was terribly interested in meeting anybody at that time. Well, she came out the front door of the church, and I saw her, and I said, "Okay, I need to change my mind about this," because I was very attracted to her. And we began to talk, and as we talked, I offered to be a little bit of a host to her and take her to various places and things, but to date her. And so we did that. She was to be in town for at least 2 weeks or more, and we went to the shore. Took her to the shore. She had never been there, being from the Midwest, and took her out to a place of camp meetings where my grandmother lived, actually, with my aunt. And I said, "We're going to go to the service." And I don't think we made it to the service. We got there, met my grandmother and aunt, and then as we left, I took her to a park, and we started to realize there was something very special going on between us. But back at her aunt and uncle's house one night, we were sitting on the front porch, And while we were on that front porch, we began to talk about the Lord and our faith. And as we talked, it became apparent to her and to myself that we had a lot more in common than simply our physical attraction to each other and perhaps our character, because she was a really sweet girl. And I guess she thought I was a nice boy, nice young man. But as we talked about the things of the Lord, I started to fall in love with her. And she began to fall in love with me, and certain boundaries began to fall away. And even though we had just met, it was apparent there was something more going on because we were sharing the same heart for God, same desire that He was our priority. And from that, she left, she went back home. We exchanged high school rings and kept in touch. She came back at the end of the summer, and at the end of the summer, we realized that we really needed to get better acquainted with each other, and we could not do it by the separation of over 600 miles. And what happened was her aunt and uncle, seeing what was developing, also having had some very young girls of their own, toddlers. They were both toddlers, these two young girls, and they said, "Jenny, come and live with us. You can help with the kids from time to time, but the uncle worked for the state. He goes, I can get you a job, but you can attend college, whatever you want to do." And so by the end of the summer, I went out and got her and helped her move. And she began to live with her aunt and uncle. And about 2 years later, we were married, you know. And I think what was, some of the fear, I can't say fear because wasn't afraid of it, but some concerns over, okay, how does one walk through a life together and grow together? Uh, what does it take? We did not know everything that was going to happen in our lives, the ups and downs, the challenges, um, and yet there was a confidence in God that if He was to be the center of our lives, He would be the one to help us through it. He would make sense of it. He would give us a mutual purpose and a hope, as well as an understood desire that if we walk through this together, we would somehow, with the grace of God and the power of God, we would have the best life possible. Not again without challenges or hardships or anything, no, but we would have the best life possible, and that He would make sure that those promises they would come true. And so we've walked through our lives like that. Uh, Again, not without its ups and downs or its bumps and so on, but trusting in the Lord, recognizing that we don't lean upon our own understanding or our own counsel, although we did take counsel from time to time with individuals. I mean, when we were married and had 3 children, and it was at that time I was working in a secular position, and now in my early 30s, I really felt a call from the Lord. And I think we talked about this on an earlier podcast. But we took counsel with individuals about how to do this, what to do, where to go, how to proceed forward. And it was our reliance upon the Lord that helped us with those decisions and have confidence. Because when those hardships and trials came, it was because we were convinced that we were actually still in the center of God's will for our lives, that we were not overly shaken to the point of disunity. It held us together. And it made us understand that even though the direction that life had taken was not separating us, but it wasn't the easy path. It was a harder path at this time. But then we trusted in the Lord and saying, well, an alternative would have been out of his will. When remaining faithful to him and faithful to each other, we were staying in the center of his will, and saw God do miracles and open doors and close doors. But in spite of it, we never questioned where we were together as husband and wife, to the point of blaming God or even blaming each other, because we knew, God was going to direct our path. We don't know what the future might hold, but we're trusting, in the Lord, that He's still directing our paths. So, you don't talk about success in a marriage as much as our willingness to remain in love with one another and committed to one another goes a lot deeper than personal comfort. It goes deeper into personal conviction. And that conviction is not that we have the strength to do it, but we have a God who will walk with us and walk us through it. So that's where we are, and we're still, still together and still looking forward to a long future. As long as the
Right.
Lord will give us. So
Right.
yeah.
I would agree with what you're how you're describing it. I would wholeheartedly agree that you must put the center of your marriage in the Lord. I remember those discussions. I hadn't thought about them, in recent years, but hearing you speak, I think back to the discussions that Gail and I had before we were married. I was already called by the Lord in a definitive call into the service of ministry. I knew that. My vision was that. My education was so directed in that direction. So I was in the mix of education for that purpose of ministry when I met Gail. And I remember the conversations like, now, if you're not interested in the ministry, you need to tell me now, because I'm not changing that calling. So if that's not, you don't, she said, but what if I'm not called to the ministry as you are, but I'm called to you? I said, if you're called to me, then you'll be called to what I do. And so we took time. That's why people say, well, you dated 3 years. Well, yeah, we had courtship for 3 years, because those questions had to be answered in a way that we were convinced, both of us, that we were marrying the other person where there's no fraud, no guile about this. We are committed to the ministry of the gospel of the Lord Yeshua, the Messiah, and to take that message wherever it took us, around the world, into the nations of the earth, wherever it took us, we would be willing to say, we'll do that together. And so those lines, and I talked about lines that we would not cross, those are part of the lines we would not cross. Those have to be set, at least in our case, had to be set before the marriage decision would be entered upon. I remember when I offered the ring after 2.5 years to Gail. About a year before we were married, I offered her a ring, and she said, "No, I'm not ready yet." I was blown away. I have the ring. I've already bought it. And she says, "No, I'm not ready. I got to make sure that the ministry is exactly where you're going is where I'm willing to go." And so I said, "Okay, how quickly will that take?" She said, "I don't know, but I need to get that settled once and for all in my life with the Lord." So in a period of weeks, or maybe 3 months, I proposed to her again, and she said yes. the Lord has told me that my life is to be with you, and and that I am fully committed to the ministry of the gospel to the nations of the earth, with you being my husband. And so she accepted the ring. But those were discussions long before there was an engagement, and and during the engagement, those were reinforced. I look at it like I look at marriage like I use an analogy. I look at it like a loom that's used to make fabric, piece of cloth. It's got threads, hundreds and thousands of threads in it, but there has to be a direction for each thread, and one is horizontal, and one's vertical. It's like a male and female. It has those lines have to mesh until there is a strong fabric. I think that should be done before marriage. There should be enough threads that are interwoven, woven together, that forms cloth. Using that analogy, and as you get married and you go through life, you have children, you start adding color and embroidery and a lot of beautiful things to that piece of fabric as you go through life. And that, to me, is like the marriage relationship that blossoms, keeps blossoming, keeps being more beautiful, goes through hard times, which you and I don't know anybody who has not had hard times, but you go through difficult times, you go through emotional challenges, you go through intellectual challenges. And so, but that fabric becomes stronger as you go through life until it is like a canvas when it's finished, that just is not easily shredded, not easily torn. And so that's the way I kind of, as an analogy of what marriage life has been to me over these 59 years plus the 3 years of courtship prior to that. So that would probably be a good way for us all to look at life in building that marriage relationship that way, so that there's not conflict in the mission. There's not conflict in the vision and the mission of what a marriage is about. There will be conflict, but it'll be where the embroidery is done and where the knots are tied, and where, it'll be other things, but it won't be over the mission and the vision.
Yeah. Well, I'm a second child, not a first child. I'm a second child. So there are things that I do that are a little bit less like fearless. They're more fearless. If I see something, I kind of don't overthink it. I just kind of run after it. And that's somewhere with Jenny and I, because the engagement, the understanding of the engagement really was before that summer was over. Now, we knew we weren't able to marry. We weren't there yet. But as far as that commitment to each other, kind of found my best friend. But and so much love that I had for her. But there were things that needed to be done. I was still in college. She was going to try to figure out whether she would go to college or get a job. And she started into college and felt that was not for her. And so she went and got a full-time job with working for the state. But I think it's that there still was a strong commitment to each other's welfare. And where I had not, I was only 20 years of age when I met her. And as you were saying earlier, you don't, as a male, there's certain things have not fully matured yet, But I think for Ginny and I, there was a developing time in our relationship. We had as you and Gail, you had certain understandings worked out. But I began to grow in the relationship. and through the relationship and because of the relationship. There were things I did not know about the female sex or women in general and how they thought or their emotional side. And we began to explore that. And as you said, then we began to have children. And as we had children, it began to adjust our relationship. And we discovered postpartum depression, and never had heard about that, but we dealt with that. And our children, in their personalities, the first child was different from the second, and the second was different from the third. You know, uh, it was a learning experience, still is a learning experience
Yeah.
and a growing experience. And so the individual that who I was at the age of 20, prayerfully and hopefully, is not the same as I am right now. Marriage has given me that opportunity of to grow as an individual, grow in character. It's not just I want to be like Christ, but I want to be compatible and walking in union and oneness, akkad, with my wife,
Yeah.
not just my wife, but with my family, and therefore the expression goes further into the family of God. It works its way out. I think as a pastor, my ability to be empathetic came from the experiences and were developed through the experiences I had in marriage and as a father. Um, as I counseled individuals, when I went to seminary, I did not take any counseling courses. That they were not part of the Old Testament biblical Hebrew. It wasn't. That was not part of that curriculum. So when I came back and became a pastor, well, that was one of the things that was expected of me. And I didn't shun it, but I also realized, uh, you know, I have not experienced everything. I don't know if I know everything, and I haven't been trained in how to counsel on everything. So I started to buy some books, like we all do. Buy some books, build up my library, do
Yeah.
some reading, and all that. But quite a quite a bit, especially when I came to marital counseling, when I came to even counseling for parents, their children, it came out of that richness of growing as a couple together, as a family together. I can't speak to how invaluable marriage was to my pastoral ministry, let alone to becoming a person. Hopefully, I've grown. Have I grown in perfection? No, I'm definitely not perfect. I'm still not without my temptations and the need to corral those, you know, and keep them at bay by way of honoring my marriage covenant. But yeah, the richness of the marriage experience, um, I don't know if it can actually be very well categorized, to say how much it really means to an individual. I'm not going to challenge those who are single, you know, or say that their life is less valuable. No, that God doesn't have a unique calling and purpose for their lives. Of course, He does. But I would speak to an accelerated course in personal development by
Mhm.
way of marriage that
Yes, it
one may
would be.
not be able to have just living as a single life. I don't know how many individuals, as you were pastoring, I mean, your life has been an evangelist, a missionary, a teacher, a pastor, a district leader, and so on. So you cover a wide range of ministry over your life and are still covering territory. But when when you were involved with the premarital counseling with couples, where I found some of the most challenging couples to counsel were those who had been single for a longer period of time, had become very self-dependent or independent. Let's put it that way. They become very independent, standing on their own. Maybe they're at the age of 35 to 40 or even 45, and God is calling them together into a union. I found some of the topics that we needed to discuss and go over was one of how to remove that independent veneer and become vulnerable, how to take those things that were individually yours and create a corporate unity. Um, One of the things I would talk to them about was I'd ask them about their bank accounts, you know, their finances, because finances can be a very challenging aspect to marriage. But I would ask them, and they say, "Well, yeah, I have my bank account, and yeah, I have my bank account, and I have these investment that." And I would talk to them. I said, "Okay, how are you going to make those separate bank accounts one bank account? How are you going to do that? That what is yours is mine and what is mine is yours, instead of, no, these are my things and they will remain my things." I said, that doesn't build towards unity. But that's what I kind of discovered a little bit, and found sometimes the more pliable individuals were the younger ones that had not experienced. So that for them, I would talk to them about building a joint bank account.
Yeah.
When you get married, do this. But I don't know. For me, yes, and I think what I'm hearing you're saying is it has formed your life. You had plans and callings, but the plans and callings were not just on one. It now became two that became one. And even where your family, with your children and so on, how they are brought into that union and how they impact and affect the union. Uh, but yeah, marriage has been good to me in a very positive way.
Yeah.
So,
I think of the Hebrew word ketubah.
okay.
You're familiar with it.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And
Marriage covenant.
the marriage covenant, exactly. And we look at when the Lord made a covenant with Israel to become a nation at Mount Sinai, and that covenant we call the Torah. The Ten Commandments, for example, is a good example of a ketubah.
Yeah. Yes.
It's a marriage covenant, and these are the things that the husband says will be the terms of our marriage, and the wife has to agree to it. That I will protect you, I will care for you, I will provide for you for the rest of your life, and this is the relationship. So you're setting your vision and your mission into a covenant relationship that's agreeable to both. She doesn't have to accept it, and but somebody has to initiate it. In this case, the Lord initiated it with Israel as His bride, and Israel said, "Yeah, we will do that. We will
Yeah.
do that." So, if when we understand marriage, not just an agreement as a legal contract that you sign and send to the courthouse and record it for the state registry, but you understand marriage as a covenant between two parties, and you understand it in biblical covenantal terms of a covenant between a man and a woman, witnessed by God and witnessed by the community, the witnesses. It's like other covenants. You would have the commitment. Here are the terms of commitment. I will do this, or I will not do that. I will do this. I will not do that. And then there's after the commitment, there's the obligation. I am taking personal responsibilities, an obligation to see that these terms are fulfilled in our relationship. That sounds a bit legal, but it's not legal. It's covenantal.
Mm-hmm.
And that difference has to be preserved. It also provides for blessing. So you got commitment, you've got obligation, you've got blessing, because a good marriage is a blessing. It blesses not only the couple that marry, it blesses their children that come, their grandchildren that come, the great children that come. And it's a blessing to the community. And it's a blessing to the state, to the world. A family exudes blessing, but it begins with a marriage relationship in covenant with each other. Of course, it has the element of witness. You bear witness with it. You have your witnesses to bear witness to this. And then then there are consequences for a breach in it. If I do this, so be it done to me. I think of that time when Abraham was put into a deep sleep in the book of Genesis. He was into a deep sleep. And then there was this, in that vision he had, that deep sleep, there was this carcass, this animal that was split in half.
Yeah.
And cut in pieces. Oh, and like this, on this side of it was a stone, big stone, this side's a big stone, and you lay out the pieces of meat on both sides of that slain animal. And then the covenant is affirmed by the one who walks between the pieces. Berit in Hebrew, the word for covenant means to kind of walk between the pieces. So that when you walk to that pieces, you're saying, may it be done to me as these pieces that are slain, that if I breach this covenant, may it be done to me as it was done to that animal. So it's a life and death matter. Not that we go around killing people, we don't, but the seriousness of the commitment, of the obligation, of the blessing, of the witness, is that it has consequences that are good for good, and it can have consequences for evil if it's breached. And so marriage kind of it mirrors the covenant God made with us, with Israel, with Abraham, with Isaac and Jacob, with Israel. Marriage mirrors that.
There might be some who are listening and might be maybe reluctant to discern or apply that towards themselves in a marriage, because it seems like, well, there's blessing, but then there's also the judgment and cursing and so on, and so it feels like it's more obligation, forced obligation. But what you're talking about when the covenant was offered, the 10 words, the 10 commandments on the first Pentecost, and then even with God, and that was Genesis 15, where Abraham split these carcasses in half and half and half, and then he was put into somewhat of a deep sleep, and then it was God who walked between the pieces and so on. The underlying
blazing torch and the smoking fire pot,
yeah,
went between it, and Abraham was not the one that went through it.
No, Abraham was the recipient of it. And
he was the recipient of the blessing.
Right.
So we've got this smoking fire pot, and we have the blazing torch.
Right.
In my thinking, the smoking fire pot is the representative of God.
Yes. Yeah.
And the blazing torch of the Messiah.
Yeah.
And so the Messiah is saying, if this covenant is breached, I will give my life for my people.
Right.
That's how I see that.
And it's seen and properly seen as a marriage contract.
Right.
In this covenant, not based upon the elements, but the spirit of love that is behind it. This is God's loving,
willing to die
mercy.
For your spouse.
Right. And what he is providing in the 10 commandments or through the covenant is life. not death, but life. And so the motivation is not out of, we're going to start giving you laws to obey and obligations and all of that. And then if you don't keep it, I'm going to really, really be upset with you. I'm going to divorce you and so on. Even though, yeah, sin and not keeping in the covenant or with the covenant, yeah, you would separate yourself from God. But God brought this about because it was, I love you. I love
Mhm.
you. And that gets lost from sometimes is they're feeling, well, that's the law. The law is just simply obligation upon obligation and restrictedness upon restriction and so on. But it's not. It's actually meant to free. It's actually to give life and preserve life, and it's it is an expression of love that perhaps we don't fully comprehend, but the
The
motivation
greatest love a
behind
person
it
can
is
have
love.
is to die for another.
Yeah,
And this is the kind of covenant relationship that's here, isn't it? Is that what you're saying?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm I think that when I sometimes when I've talked to individuals about the law and the covenant, because here we started our conversation talking about our marriages and our relationships and how they have developed and what's perhaps kept them together and so on, and we were talking about our relationship with the Lord, and that brought us into the understanding of the Ketubah, as you mentioned it, the covenant, the wedding or marriage covenant, and that marriage covenant began there in Exodus, at Pentecost, in the giving of the law, but they were not for restriction of your behavior, but of an expression of how to enter into a loving relationship with a holy God.
Where trust prevails.
Yes,
Because you think of those codes of ethics,
yes,
those moral codes, that's not about law in the sense of a legal, it's a, it's about the love someone has for the other so deep that they will not breach those things.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
There
But
will be no adultery,
right,
for example. There will be no bearing of false witness against another.
that would break the relationship.
Right. It would. Mhm.
Yeah, that would break the
So
relationship
the
then.
ketubah is about protecting the relationship.
Yeah, and that gives us as individuals not just watching Christ and saying I want to be like Christ, therefore I walk in that direction, but His Word and His covenants are also directions, light to our paths,
Mhm.
light to direct us into how to formulate proper relationships, how to maintain them, how to walk in love in them. But it's rooted in love. It's all rooted in love. So this is good. I wasn't expecting us to have this conversation, although I do appreciate it. Where I would like us to continue to talk as we close this out, unless you have, and I'll give you the last word, Ed, if you have some other
No,
wisdom for us.
I'm very pleased. I think I was surprised with this conversation too tonight because um, well, I was going to go in a whole other direction with you.
Yeah, yeah,
However, it happens to be our wedding anniversary, and you brought that out unexpectedly to me, and then asked me how do I relate to
right.
that, and so that changed the whole direction of this conversation tonight.
Well,
But I think it's a very healthy one and a very
I think
meaningful
so.
one.
We
And
need people to know we're just not thinking heads. You know that we don't have any life or any emotions or any relationships and
yeah,
so on. Uh, this is not the all-encompassing thing about who we are and our relationships, especially our relationship with our wives, very important, and
very
we
much so.
cherish that. And so I just it just made sense. Let's talk about that. Let's let's uh, let's talk and see what the Lord would develop. I do want to carry on our conversations, just speaking of what's going to come in the the weeks ahead, because we're still looking at and unwrapping who God is. And the God of Scripture is He a God that we can trust? We were talking about trust before, and we were talking about things of being righteous and unrighteous. But last week, or the last episode that we had, whether it was last week or not, but as we try to record from week to week. But our last discussion on the deception of the deceived mind, and we were talking about what and how that could develop and why, and God's, it's spoken about in Scripture, it's dealt with, and it's something that we began and opened our discussions with. And you were very much speaking about trust and the lack of trust. You spoke about Soren Kierkegaard, and do you remember that exact quote about two ways that you're deceived?
Let's see if I I'm trying to remember exactly what Soren Kierkegaard said, but it was something to the effect that there are two ways
Right.
to be fooled.
Yes.
One is to believe what isn't true.
Right.
And the other is to refuse to believe what is true.
What is true. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and he's right about that. Deception is a spiritual and psychological condition of trust in a false reality. That's what deception is all about.
And we spoke about that. Not necessarily did we exhaust that, but I would like in the coming weeks, and there are some other things that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about, I think, exploring a little more deeply how we come to understand or know truth. When Pilate said, "What is truth?" It wasn't a genuine inquiry, but he was being disingenuous and mockingly, in a sense, what is truth? But if you are going to walk away from a deceived mind, you have to walk into truth, and you have to trust in what you know or what you're learning. Trust that it is true. Yes. So I want to explore that in the weeks ahead, perhaps, unless some other convenient topic pops up, but I'd like to do that. I had sent you some chapters from the book that I had written, and I start out exploring truth and what is truth. And I think we can spend some time on that, and just we don't have to rush it, because it's a very deep conversation. And I believe it's the establishment, what established us into a place of faith, where we put our faith and how and so on. So, Ed, I enjoyed this conversation. Again, I would say happy anniversary.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Gail, glad that it kind of fell on the time of our podcasting together, but it's good. 59 years and counting. Wonderful. Well, we're going to say goodnight. And thanks again, Ed, for taking time to just talk. And we will hopefully see these podcasts being put up on YouTube very soon. But thanks.
Very good.
God bless you, Ed.
Thank you, Jack. Have a good night. See you next week.
See you too. Bye-bye. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe for further notifications when new videos are available.